Hello and welcome to this week's edition of ED 657. This week we're going to cover chapters 11 and 12 from our text. We're going to talk about cross-cultural understanding in higher education and e-learning, and a little bit about researching e-learning. So first we're going to talk about what is the meaning and the classification of culture, and how do we need to be concerned about culture in an e-learning context. So we're going to say that culture is defined as the patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that people display as mental programs. And this is attributed to a gentleman by the name of Hofstede. He wrote in the early 1990s to the mid-1990s about the different dimensions of culture. And this is a little bit that's not in your text, but it's part that I thought is really relevant for you to understand exactly how pervasive culture is and how much it plays a part in things that we do both consciously and unconsciously. So we're going to talk about two models. One is the iceberg model, which is really a very graphic representation and easy to understand. And the other one is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. This one has several dimensions with abbreviations, and it's something that's going to be used in a reading that I've also assigned in Blackboard. So I think it's important to go over these so people know what they are. So the iceberg model is very easy to understand, and it's something that you probably know subconsciously, even if you weren't really aware of it. The representation here is talking about what you see on the surface of the culture. You know, it's there, it's very obvious, people can see it, it's very plain to see, but also consistent with that culture are a lot of the unspoken rules that go along with the culture, things that that you have learned from birth, things that are part of your community that you live in. And the third part of this is the unconscious rules, those cultural biases that we are born with that, we don't even consciously make a decision about, but it is a cultural thing that we deal with. So to go back to Hofstede's model, his model is considered a pyramid model. And what it does is it talks about the culture as the middle and your personality as one manifestation and human nature is the other part that plays into the culture. So he has these 5 dimensions here, and you don't have to worry about trying to write this down because I did include this in the notes part of the PowerPoint, so it'll be easier for you to remember. But this is relevant because these abbreviations are used a lot when they talk about culture and how it affects e-learning. So the first one is what we call the power distance index. And this power distance index is defined as the extent to which less powerful members of organizations and institutions like your family or like social institutions at work and all accept and expect that power is distributed unequally. We know in a family setting that usually the parents have more power than the children do. So that is what's called the power distance index. So in this dimension, inequality in powers proceed from the followers, or the lower level understands this. So that's one dimension. The second dimension is called the individualism or collectivism, the IDV dimension. And this one explores the degree to which people in a society are integrated into groups. So individualistic societies have loose ties that often only relate an individual to his or her immediate family. They emphasize the I in conversations versus the we. Its counterpart, which is collectivism, obviously, is the other way. It's a tightly integrated relationship that tie extended families and others into a group. These in-groups have undoubted loyalty and they support each other when a conflict arises. The next one is called the masculinity and femininity dimension. And this dimension, masculinity, is defined as a preference in society for achievement, heroism, assertiveness, and material rewards for success. Its counterpart represents a preference for cooperation, modesty, caring for the weak, and quality of life. So women in these types of societies tend to display different values. In feminine societies, they share modest and caring views equally with men. In a more masculine society, women are more empathic and competitive, but notably less empathic than the men. So there's still that differentiation. This dimension is often viewed as taboo in highly masculine societies. The uncertainty avoidance index, this one is defined as society's tolerance for ambiguity, in which people embrace or avoid an event of something unexpected, unknown, or away from the status quo. So this is another society that scores a high degree in this index. They want stiff codes of behavior, guidelines, laws, and generally rely on things that they consider to be absolute truth, or they believe that one lone truth dictates or overarches everything that happens in the society. The last one is called the long-term versus short-term orientation. This dimension associates the connection of the past with the current and future actions or challenges that are faced by the culture. A lower degree in this index indicates that traditions are honored and kept while steadfastness is valued. If you have a high degree in this index, or the long-term side of it, you view adaptation, circumstantial, pragmatic problem solving as a necessity. So those are some dimensions that are important to understand for really embracing what it means to have cultural differences in our learning. So here's another graphic that kind of makes it a little easier to look at when you're trying to understand these different dimensions. So what are the issues that we face when we're talking about e-learning and we're trying to make sure that our e-learning appeals to all of our learners? We have learning cultures, you would have learning styles, then you also have, as a layer over that, you can have institutional cultures, and you can have learners who feel that they have been marginalized or they are in a different category than other learners. So we know that cultural diversity has a lot to do with these different factors. Gender has been something that's been obviously a huge factor for many years, and although it's gotten better, it is still out there. Ageism, or having diversity due to age, also is another factor that has, unfortunately, in the past probably 10 years become more prevalent, at least in the United States, as the fact that we have a lot of people who stay in the workforce longer than they used to. Nationality is also another factor that affects diversity. How diverse is the community in which you are preparing the e-learning, or how diverse is the community where you're going to export this e-learning and have it available to people? Religion also, and then the socioeconomic status of your learners. All of these things go together to make the cultural diversity of your e-learners. So the questions we have to ask ourselves as the person who is providing this social media interaction or this type of learning: we have a new society. Do we have a new culture? How does this new culture fit into our cultural background and our e-learning? And what is really the mission and the value of our university? What are we trying to do? When you think about having e-learning and the mission and the values of the university, think about one of the biggest factors that we have with e-learning is the fundamental issue of a language barrier. Often the information is available, but it may not be in a language or even a dialect that is familiar enough to all the people who are trying to take advantage of the learning. So when we talk about internet, online universities, and cultures, geography is not as important as it used to be, which for all of us is really a wonderful thing. So there are so many educational opportunities available to people because we now have this information available online. But we have these tools. Should we use different e-learning tools based more upon the students that we know we have in our e-learning classes, or are the tools we have adequate? Should we try to integrate more social media into our e-learning? What is it that our culture, our students are demanding in our classes? So they talk about some of the cultural aspects, and you will see that when you go back to those levels that I just talked about from Hofstede, you'll see that if you have this high uncertainty, how this affects your ability to take on e-learning and how it's harder or easier based on these different dynamics. They also talk some about, based upon your cultural background, how you would have a context for understanding and learning things. And they talk about one list of these people have a high context and understand and know how to learn, but for certain things they have more issues. Like some people, if you are you have a high context because you are reflective and you understand the e-learning. But for some people, the e-learning has a low context because they think out loud, but they do have a lot of sharing knowledge openly versus being sharing just knowledge with a team. So these are all different things that factor into our e-learning. So some of the variables that we have to think about when we are trying to present anything in e-context, be it social media, be it e-learning, first and most important is the usability and the design of the interface that we are using. We need to test our colors and understand that icons, pictures, and symbols and things like this have different meanings for different people. It's some cultures have aversions to particular images being displayed. And so you wouldn't want to inadvertently post something that could be considered offensive to a certain culture. There are also certain colors that have negative connotations that you have to be aware of. And you also need to know that, what are your students' expectations of the education and the university? When the student signs up for your college or your university or engages with your university through social media, what are their expectations? Do they have an expectation that you are culturally diverse and able to understand how to present information in a non-offensive way? So some of the e-learning concerns that we need to understand is this term that I really have a hard time pronouncing, but I think it's hegemony. But this is where you have leadership or dominance by one group or country. And a major concern of a lot of, European or Eastern cultures is that the Western culture appears to be dominant in the e-learning design, adaptation, and dissemination. Although a lot of research that I have done has shown me that countries like Australia, New Zealand, those countries, and a lot of the European countries have a much more structured, at least through the K-12 part, have much more structured pathway for students to understand about e-learning than we do. But yet the Western culture is still seen as being a dominant factor in this. And can our inclusion of cultural diversity promote new forms of e-learning by putting together some of the cultural forms from the Eastern culture, from the European or Eurasian culture, one of those cultures, and come up with a new hybrid that's going to be sufficient for e-learning? So this is the end of the PowerPoint presentation, and like I said, I did put in some, let me see, what do we want to call it? I put in the notes so that it would make it easier for you to have them, so you didn't have to try to write down while we're talking. For chapter 12, I decided it was probably better not to have a PowerPoint, but I've included some readings and some things that I would like you to look at when it deals about the research. Chapter 12 in this book mainly is talking about how you can go to research databases and provide more research and be part of a research entity. I wanted to talk more about what do we see as the new things that we could do in e-learning and in social media to ensure that we engage and can retain the different cultures and the different groups of students that we want to have. So as always, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please email me and let me know what's on your mind. And I look forward to talking with you via email or Blackboard. And I hope you have a good week. Thank you.